Hello and welcome to the Northwest Yearly Meeting Podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Jacob.
And I'm your other co-host, Austin. And thanks for joining us in listening to our podcast where we're having conversations with people all around the Evangelical Friends world about all sorts of topics, trying to navigate, what does it look like to be a friend in modern times.
We hope that you enjoy listening to these and that these conversations are beneficial to you as they come out every single month.
Thank you and enjoy today's episode.
All right. Welcome to the November episode of the Northwest Yearly Meeting Podcast. I was just telling Austin before we started recording, which now I'm going to say it again, but it just got cold here in Idaho. And so it's raining outside. I don't know. It's probably raining. It's been raining in Oregon for a while, but it's raining here and my heater's just kicked on. I'm smelling the burning dust. So it's officially fall and winter time for me here.
Yeah, it's that time of year, though. I mean, it'll be colder probably at the time this gets released.
Yes, which I'm a fan of. I mean, I grew up in Texas and it does get cold there despite what people say, but obviously not as cold as around here. But as someone who didn't grow up with snow and didn't grow up with really like super cold temperatures, it has not lost its appeal to me yet. So I still enjoy snow. I still enjoy fall and wintertime. Maybe a time will come where I'm not a fan of those things, but I like the cold weather season.
See, I'm thriving right now. I made it through summer and now I'm in fall. And me and my wife always joke about how every year I do this. Fall, it's my favorite season. I love everything about fall. And then spring rolls around. I love everything about spring. And so it's kind of a joke.
They're all your current favorite.
And so I'm like right in the mode of like, fall, it's my favorite. I love it. Flannels, hot coffee, rain,
It's nice.
It's good. The light, it gets dark at a reasonable hour so I can put my kids to bed.
That is a huge one. I never have really worked. I mean, yeah, but this past summer with our 2-year-old and it's staying light until 9:30, that was rough. That was rough.
Feel ya. But the other good thing that happens in fall that has been kind of happening more regular is the multiplication conference.
Yeah,
this is the second year they're doing it.
I think it's been longer than that actually, but yeah, I'm sure our guest here will correct us. But yeah, we on our last episode, we at the very end, if you made it to the very end, we gave a little plug. But yeah, November 13th to the 15th is the Evangelical Friends Church Multiplication Conference. And so our guest today is Lisa Garon. We're going to bring her on here in a second, but we'll talk a little bit about the conference in particular. She's kind of got some connection to that, but we also just wanted to have a larger conversation with her about church planting in general. And she's on some boards and a part of this idea of church planting. And so we just wanted to talk about that as we think about friends multiplication. Lisa, we've had repeat guests before, but Lisa is like one of our very first guests, not the first, but she was on the second episode. So if you want to scroll back, if you're a late listener to this podcast, go all the way back to episode 2, which came out of October of 2022. It's crazy to think that we've been doing this for that
2 years. Whoa.
But yeah, so Lisa was on the October 2022 episode. It was titled Evangelism and Outreach. You may know Lisa. Her and her husband Bob are co-pastors at Sherwood Friends Church in Oregon, and they've been there I think since 2020 or a little bit right after pandemic is when they started there. So we're going to bring Lisa on and talk about Friends Multiplication Conference and church planting.
Hello.
Hey,
I'm glad to be back.
I know.
Yeah.
Whoop, whoop.
It's been 2 years.
I know. We were just saying to before you came on, so you'll have to reintroduce yourself. Maybe some people don't know who you are, but you were on
okay.
in October
I just
2022.
assumed you guys didn't like me anymore. I mean, that's what I thought.
No, it's hard when we only do one a month.
I know.
There's a lot of people we want to talk to, and
I
so
know.
yeah,
Well, they're good people too.
there are.
What's hard is it's not like we just do this on the side. It's not like we have like editors and people who are just
Oh
like,
yeah.
getting contacts and all that sort of stuff. So it's like,
But
I
yeah,
hear you on that.
for anyone who maybe doesn't know, can you just
Sure.
give a brief introduction to yourself, who you are,
Yeah.
whatever you want to share about yourself?
Cool. Well, my name is Lisa Garon. I am one of the pastors serving at Sherwood Friends Church in Sherwood, Oregon. That's about 30 minutes south of Portland. Um, let's see. That's one hat. I serve as the clerk of Board of Local Outreach, which oversees church planting. We're going to talk a little bit about that, I think, today for Northwest Yearly Meeting. And then my other hat I like to wear is I'm also the Director of Communications and Engagement for Evangelical Friends Church Planting. So those are kind of the three hats I like to wear right now, aside from mom of an adult child. My son, Braden, is 20. I cannot believe it. He just turned 20 last month, and he is serving in the Coast Guard. And then my husband, Robert, and we have been married for 21 years. So that's a little bit about me.
Nice.
Also, you have your own podcast now too.
Whoop whoop. Yes. Well, it's with Evangelical Friends Church Planting. Yeah, we're we can, I don't know when you guys want to talk about that, but
Shameless plug right now.
Okay, all right, going for it. So Brian Donahue approached me. I've actually wanted to start a podcast for like a long time. And that may still be down the line of something that's like just me. But with the International Friends Church Multiplication Conference coming up in less than a month, which is crazy, Brian Donahue, who is a church planter out in Ohio, he is the pastor of Pursuit Friends Church, house church model. And so he reached out to me. He serves on the board for EFCP. And we love our acronyms. So EFCP is here moving forward, Evangelical Friends Church Planting. But he reached out to me and said, "Hey, you want to start a podcast?" And I said, "Hey, why not?" So we just decided to start a podcast called Church Planting Conversations with EFCP. And so we're only 2 episodes in. We'll be recording one early next week, but the goal is that we just want to talk about church planting. We want to talk about all the different kinds of church plants that are out there. We want to talk about all the different types of people it takes to plant churches. In fact, that was episode 2. We spent a lot of time, him and I, just kind of introducing ourselves, what brought us into the church planting world, etc. So yeah, that's a little bit about the podcast.
Yeah, well, I've only listened to episode 1 so far, so I'm behind. I'll have to go listen to episode 2.
That's all right.
But yeah, and we'll link that in the description here if anyone wants to find that. But for sure, episode 1, you guys talked with Jim Lashana.
We do. Yeah, and he's really so he's been with a little history on EFCP. So Evangelical Friends Church Planting is this like new entity. It's just forming in 2024, but the conference has been going on since 2013. And it took place 2013. They were expecting like maybe a few dozen people to show up, and they had like over 100. So they had a lot of people, and they were like, wow, there's something here. So then they did it again the next year. And then it wasn't international. It was held at Berkeley College. So it was just a national kind of thing. And then they held it again the following year. Then it's been every other year since. And so he's been a part of it since the beginning. So it felt fitting that for our first episode, we would talk with him about it. So, and I think we can all understand that 2020 is kind of what propelled it into the international space with Zoom and
the virtual world.
Yes.
Yeah.
God works in mysterious ways.
Well, and that kind of, before you came on, that kind of maybe speaks to Austin. Before you came on, Austin was like, I think they've been doing this conference for the past couple years. Which, so you just say it's been happening since 2013, but I think a lot of people really became aware of it in the past couple of years because of the online portion of it.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
because it was made much more accessible into people's homes. And so people could be watching it online, participating right from their living room or their home office or whatever. And so this year we're like now doing something unique again. And so this year is going to be like the largest gathering of evangelical friends like in history, because
Mm.
it's not just going to be online or in person. It's actually going to be online and in person. So there's going to be like 4 or 5 like different conferences happening all over the place at the same time. So one at Malone University, one at Berkeley College, one right here. I'm in Oregon, so just the next town over is Newberg, and that's George Fox University, and that's in partnership with Portland Seminary, online. And then we actually have a campus in Bangladesh. So this is really exciting. Plus, there's going to be watch parties going on all over the place. We know that there will be gatherings and groups of people throughout the United States, in Rwanda, and some possibly other international locations too. Plus, all the people who just want to participate by themselves. So it's going to be a pretty massive online plus in person gathering.
Yeah, I know there's a watch party here in Idaho. I'm going to be at Meridian Friends Church. Some people
Yeah.
are getting together there nightly to watch it. But as I was just looking through the website, I mean, for sure, if you're in one of the locations where you can go in person, like at George Fox or Malone, any of those places, like there's some pretty cool speakers that I think, from my understanding, are only happening at those like in-person locations.
Yes, kind of. So
Kind of.
here's the cool thing is that when you register, you will get access post conference to all the keynotes and all the workshops happening at any of those 3 universities and online. So if
Oh,
you are like, I really want to watch Greg Nettle from Stadia, but you're not going to be at Malone post conference, you'll be able to actually watch his keynote. So you'll have access to all those resources after the conference.
well, that's good to know. I don't know if I just missed that or if that's not public information or whatever, but yeah, that's good to know because yeah, I was
Yeah.
looking through there and I was like, dang, that's a really cool speaker, but he's only at the Malone campus. I can't go there.
Yeah. Yes, no, that's everywhere. All the keynotes, all of the workshops will be included. The affinity groups, so places for conversation, the prayer gatherings and fellowship receptions, those will not be recorded because they kind of lose an element if you're not engaged with it,
Hmm.
kind of live. So
Sure.
but that's why we're encouraging watch parties. So if you are just in a place where you're listening to this and you're like, there's no in-person location, I don't really have anybody to do, I don't really have anybody, I can't go to the in-person. I don't want to just do it by myself, but you can gather a group of people together, even if it's 3 or 4 people in your living room or a part of your church, and you can gather in a watch party setting to have conversation and work through what you've just heard and what God might be doing in your local area.
Mm. Yeah, that's really cool. Well, unless Austin, do you have any other questions specifically about
No,
the conference?
no.
I wanted to kind of like obviously talk about the conference, but
Yeah.
just talk about church planting in general.
Mm,
So like you may have shared this last time you were on 2 years ago. We didn't talk specifically about church planting
right.
then. We talked more about like outreach and stuff.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm just curious, can you share a little bit maybe on your background with church planting and your, this is probably a really big answer, but philosophy on church planting?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Um, so my background with church planting is it's kind of interesting because I am kind of in this church planting world, but I've not planted a church.
Hmm.
I've not been a part of planting a church directly. Um, in May of this year, I graduated from Berkeley College with my graduate degree in missional multiplication. So lots of stuff on church planting there. And when we look at the Great Commission, we're told to go and make disciples. Well, when we look at church planting, when we create something new energy around a message or a group of people, there you have the possibility of it being a church. And so, how do we how do we enter into the space of kind of, I think we get stuck in our minds of what a church is supposed to look like. And so how do we kind of remove our cultural understanding of what a church plant is and enter into more of realistically what a church plant actually is in whatever context? That might mean that some churches are going to look like brick and mortar, like what we think of is like with the traditional Sunday morning service and a worship band and somebody preaching and all of that. That might be, and that's great. But Brian, actually with Pursuit Friends, they have 2 house churches as a part of their network. And so their church looks different. In fact, he and I were talking today a little bit, and he was talking about how not only will they have a Sunday morning service, but then people are at his house for 3 or 4 hours because after they're done with their service, they're all sharing a meal, sitting on their patio, and they're having conversation, digesting the service, and then their kids are out playing in the back. And the second house church actually meets in the evening on Sundays. So I think we kind of have to remove our philosophy or our theory that in order to plant a new church, it has to look a certain way. I don't know if I'm exactly answering your questions.
No, you are.
But I think that my personal philosophy on church planting is this, that if every person, if there was a massive revival and people, like I live in Sherwood, there's like 20,000 people that live here. If every single person came to know the Lord and flooded our churches because there was a massive outpouring of the Holy Spirit and there was a revival, which we can only hope, right? The churches that we have currently, which is probably right around 10 or so, probably a few more than that, churches, there's not enough seats to house all of the people in our town. And if that's true in Sherwood, how true is that in Newburgh, or how true is that where you live in Idaho, or where you live in South Salem area, Austin? So we do not have enough churches because the churches that we have right now would not house all of those people if we were ready for what God might do and pour out. So it's worth the conversation of what new thing might God be doing and how can I be a part of facilitating that and saying yes to that.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Yeah, I'm quiet because my mind's working, and I was just trying to come up with like a good question, a good follow-up question.
And I apologize. I see like the sun is setting
Yeah,
at like a
you're
perfect
good.
angle, so I'm like trying to dance around it.
You're
Sure,
good.
we're gonna do this. You'll see
There
my
you go.
big planner in the background.
Yeah, the
so.
big calendar.
Yep.
Does it feel good to scratch things off that calendar?
It does.
Or to scratch days off of it or whatever?
Yes.
Well, I think it had to do with just following up on that question of like, well, what is a church? And like what you say that, but then I'm like, okay, so like what distinguishes, a church from like, say, like a small group, right? Or and how does that affect, like how does that affect sort of the because like on one sense you could say like the church is like anywhere where like God's people are gathered, right?
Sure.
But on like on another sense, it's just like, well, what distinguishes, a church versus like some rando who has like 3 friends meeting in his house? Because I do think that there is a difference. It's like the difference between like stubble and a beard.
Yes.
Where it's like you're like not quite a beard, but almost.
Right.
But that like they're like, where is that, like, I know that but like when you're thinking about planting a church and like
Sure.
who plants churches and what the, like, I think that's kind of a question to ask at least, or to consider.
Yeah. And so when we're looking at church planting, so there's kind of this self-sustaining idea behind if something is kind of a standalone church. And so when you look at the self-sustaining piece, so the 3 selves are self-governance. So they have their own bylaws, they're operating as their own entity, they have their own governance structure, elder board, other boards as necessary. And so on. Now, and then you've got self-supporting. So they have financial independence from other places. So one of the models of church planting is that a mother church or a parent church would would send out people to plant a new church. And that might mean some of the members go, but also with that would likely be some financial support that would go to them as well. So when that church plant can become self-sustaining, where they do not need that financial dependence from that church, that would be one part of that. So self-supporting and then self-propagation. And so that really what that is that it's a church that's indigenous to the area. And so it's made up of people from the area that it's being planted in. Now here in America, I think that was kind of something when I first started exploring kind of the church planting world and being familiar with these three selves, that was the one that kind of had a disconnect for me, because we're like just such a large country and we're not often traveling across into different cultures directly in our minds anyway, even though we do. But like thinking about the missionary who goes over to, Africa or Latin America, and you're an Anglo person and you're the one planting the church. Well, that's not going to be a self-sustaining church. It's got to be the people who are indigenous to the area, wherever that is, has got to be the ones who are doing the work to make it their own. So that's that self-propagation piece. So if a church plant can it's made up of people who are from that area, ingrained in that area, it's self-supporting financially, and it's self-governing, then it really can move into that church status. And I guess self-supporting, that's probably the one that's kind of one of the biggest hangups, I think, for people when it comes to the topic of church planting. But really, you have to ask yourself maybe the question, well, what do I actually need? What do we actually need to plant a church? What do we actually need to be a self-sustaining church? And really doing that fine-tooth comb of looking at costs.
Yeah, I think money is one of those big, like when I was thinking about this conversation, it was like, this might be like taking us in a little bit of a different direction, but like I think there is a stereotype of churches that are church planting churches, right? They're like, they're a certain size, they probably have a couple thousand members, they have decent resources financially, so they can just like go ahead and do that. But then I have found in like my small church context, there's this huge reticence with the idea of church planting because of the financial aspect, right? They're like, well, we don't have enough resources. So there's like this very much this like limited resource sort of idea. But maybe you could address like we're not big enough to do this, or we don't have the funds to plant a church, but maybe you could kind of push back on that response and say, like, why might they be wrong? Why might small churches be wrong, saying that like you don't have to have a whole bunch of money or quote unquote resources?
Yeah. Yes, that's a good question and a common one, I would say. And I don't know if I'm going to have all the answers today on this topic, but
come on.
I know I try to have as many answers as I can, but I do fall short. But I think the biggest thing I would encourage is that, well, a couple of things. I, as your listeners may remember from before, I come from the business world a little bit, and so a lot of it, and so I kind of default to some kind of colloquialism. I can't say the word. What's the word? You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
I kind of tend to fall back on some things from the business world. So one of the things is you have to spend money to make money. And so that's kind of maybe sounds a little trite when we're talking about church planting and something real spiritual, like starting a new faith community. But the reality is that when we're investing in something, when we're kind of putting our money where our mouth is, when we're investing in something, then not only are we committing with our money, but we're actually committing like our whole self to that cause, whatever that might be. And so when we have some skin in the game of like, okay, I'm going to invest my $10 my month, my $50 a month, my $100 a month as a church entity, we're going to commit to supporting this church planter and these people going to plant a church. Then there's kind of this, I want to see that succeed. I want to see that do well. And so not only, and that's not done through like a control factor of like, well, we're supporting you financially, so you have to listen to us. It's not about that. It's about mentoring up the baby church. It's about parenting the baby church to raise it up, to be able to have it stand on its own two legs. Because again, one of those selves is self-governance. If they are never able to kind of operate on their own and get their wobbly legs settled and steady, then they're never going to be able to be on their own. And so what I would say to a small church who thinks, well, we're not ready yet to plant a church. We're not ready for that. And I was trying before we talked today, I couldn't find it, but there is research to actually show that churches that multiply churches that send out and plant churches, if nothing else, they stay steady in their attendance. Often they actually grow. And so multiplication will breed multiplication. You're going to see, it's like God will just provide those people and those funds and those resources and whatever else that seems to be taken away, that will come in eventually again. And then the church will be in a place, let's send out another one, and let's send out another one, and be able to be a multiplying church.
Austin, you say like the stereotype or whatever of the churches that plant churches are 1,000 members and whatever. And I think that would be my first thought too. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of, like, it's an organization called 9 Marks. They say like these are the 9 marks of what a biblical church should be. I know about them. I've read some of their stuff. I maybe don't fall fully in line with them, so this isn't a full endorsement on that organization and what they stand for and whatever. But I will say one of their standpoints is, and it's a lot of their stuff is very like hard line, cutting down the line. One of their arguments is, if you have 2 services, you have 2 churches. Like, they're very pro, you should not have multi-service churches. And if you have a 9:30 a.m. service and a 10:45 a.m. service, you have 2 completely different congregations, and they don't think that's biblical, and they think you should just split them off and go plant a church with that. And so I think, once again, I'm not totally endorsing that, but I think a lot more churches fit into that category of having 2 services that are not 1,000 member churches. And so, like, if we were to take that approach and that aspect, like, I think in theory, a lot more churches could potentially do some kind of church plant if they were to take that hardline approach of like, we're basically 2 congregations anyway, let's just split. Now it gets complicated there because it's like, well, the pastor is probably preaching at both services and the worship team is probably the same at both services. So there are some people that, if you take that hardline stance, well, now this group doesn't have a pastor and doesn't have worship team. So you got to figure some of that stuff out. But like, I don't know how that lands with either of you. Like, if you have 2 services, you have 2 churches.
Well, I guess that I would push back in what's the purpose of church, because here's the thing. I attended one of those like very large churches, and we had several campuses as well as several services. And so usually I was at the 9 a.m. service and I sat around the same people, and I would say that there's some truth to what they're saying. However, I was hearing the same message of mission and spiritual formation and discipline and all the other kind of pieces of being a Christ follower. I was hearing the same message that my sister at the campus that, down the street for 20 minutes, she was hearing the same message as I was hearing. And the person who was going to Saturday night at 5 p.m. was hearing the same message I was hearing. And then there'd be other events and there'd be things going on in the life of the church. That's Monday through Saturday, right? Or, from the time you leave church on Sunday to the time you go back to church, whatever that is, that's what really where the life of the church is. And I think that's addressed in Acts 2, where it talks about that the disciples gathered together every day to break bread and learn from the apostles' teaching, and so on and so on. And so the life of the church, what's happening in those gatherings in between your Sunday morning gatherings, that's as much of a part of church as like just your separate services. And so sure, while you're sitting around the same people every Sunday, and so like that's kind of what you think of as your church, really the way I kind of thought of it more is the people I sat around, it kind of gave me that like small church feel in a very large church. And then when I decided I'm going to attend a community group, guess what? Like that bigger church now just got smaller again. I'm going to volunteer with the middle school ministry. Now my church just got smaller again because I met more people. And then there's commonality It wasn't a separate church, but there was a group of us that were like, oh, we all feel called to be in this area right now. And so now we're going to serve in this way. And we see that with the apostles needed to make sure that the widows were being taken care of because they weren't having their needs met. And so they said, well, let's assign some people. So they gathered together some deacons and they said, okay, you guys handle distributing food and we're going to focus on teaching. And so was that two separate churches? No, that was just two separate ministries within the same context, same area, same church gathering.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I mean, Jacob, your statement about if you have two different services, you have two different churches. It reminded me,
which once again, I'm not fully endorsing that. I'm just
it did bring up a point that I heard, and again, this isn't like, I don't know how much I think this is true, but it feels like it accords to reality somewhat, of like, there was like a sociologist who said that you basically can only have space for about 150 relationships in your life, and that like most of those are like going to be like acquaintances or like just people that you know in your community, and then you'd have like a smaller set of people who'd be your like casual friends. These would be like people that like you might meet at like, if you're a mom at like a mom's group that you see on the regular, but like you don't know each other super well. And then you have your close friends, which would be like a small group. And then you'd have like your family, and then you might have like your spouse, and you like three close friends. And that like human beings weren't designed to have tons of like being in giant communities, because you just like end up, you just can't have space for it. And how like when I've heard that, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. And like why I feel like even in large churches, this kind of dynamic happens where you get this funneling effect that we choose to like I remember when I lived in Florida, me and my wife, we attended a mega church, and it was kind of new for me. And what was interesting about it was they had it was a satellite campus sort of deal. The satellite campus, like that one was really small. It was like 100 and some odd people.
Right.
Even though you're connected to a lot of like a larger organization, it didn't feel large, right? And then they had small groups, and it was like, I was like, I just feel like that pattern has occurred over and over. And like that's why it's like most human settlements for most of human history have been these like villages or small towns that like never get over like 500 people. But it's like now we live in an era where it's like we live in these mega cities, um but yeah, like it just made me wonder, it's like, and to go back to your comment of like, I do feel like there's been this conglomeration of churches. Like I read on the news of like, I read one article about how there's this pattern now, there's this new thing that's happening where like big, large mega churches are basically taking over smaller churches and making them their campuses. And so then they just become like
adoptions, campus adoptions. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, whoa, like that's like a whole like, and a part of me was just like, I read it and I was kind of like in a bad mood that day. And I was like, this makes me so sad for small churches. But then on the other hand, you're like, oh, this makes sense because it's like keeping these smaller churches afloat. But it goes back to the things of like, maybe with church planting, it's like, if we have like, tons of people, maybe it's like time to like, like when do you split, right? When do you plant a church is maybe a good question to ask. Like,
yeah. And that's kind of they have an article once again on that 9 marks thing. It's like this one pastor, actually, I think he was in Spokane, was, saying like before he got on board with this thing, like his church was looking at adding a third service. And I think that's kind of when he felt convicted. It's like, why should we add a third service at this site? Why don't we just go plant a new church somewhere else,
So
we're getting so many people, why don't we just take some of these people and go start something new?
See, that's where I push back a little bit on that, because so then it depends on where you're going to plant it. So sure. So again, let's talk about Sherwood. This is where I'm at. So I'm in Sherwood. Let's say we just had an influx of people, and for some reason we've got 20% of our congregation lives in Hillsboro, which is like 45 minutes away. Let's just say that's the case. well, then does it make sense at that point? Like, well, let's plant a church then in Hillsborough, where then not only like they're willing to make the drive, but they might have people in their spheres of influence, their neighbors, people that they're baristas at the coffee shop, their cashiers. Let's go ahead and plant a church in that area. However, America, we're so like transient, like we're so willing to travel 15 to 20 minutes. So then does it make sense to take up a whole nother building, put all those resources into that to plant a new church rather than maximizing what you could potentially have for services? I don't know if I necessarily agree that that's always the best option. I think that there's not a black and white option. I think that it's really got to be case by the church. And then if you multiply, you need to look at the demographics of where people are located and then seek to plant churches where like your highest demographic is.
So then that kind of leads me to this next obvious question would be, if a church was like, we're like thinking about, getting into church planting, like when would be the time that you'd be like, oh, okay, this is like the golden moment when you'd want to plant a church, like out of your congregation?
Oh, I think it starts much earlier than that. One conversation that I've been having with, so in my role with EFCP, I've been talking with the yearly meetings across our country. And one of the common themes is a lack of a leadership pipeline. And so are we raising up people to be church planters? Are we doing that? And right now, that is what I would say is the biggest need. What is our pipeline to develop church planters? And so a church planter, what are some basic characteristics of them? They are probably starters and self-starters. They're highly driven. They're probably very creative. They want to start something new and they just want to go. That's kind of indicative of many church planters. Now, I'm not saying everyone fits that mold, but that is a common element. And so what does it look like in our churches now to be raising up those leaders? We identify like, it's not even like looking at somebody and saying, oh, you're going to be a church planter one day, let's throw you through this pipeline. It's, hey, would really love to see you. What if you and I were to lead a Bible study group together? And let's start this together. And then I'm going to hand it off to you after so much time. Or, hey, I really could use some help. We really want to up our communication in our newsletter. What do you think about kind of exhibiting some creativity and taking this over? And then you just kind of see how people step into whatever that area is. Now, it should be something that they lean into in one way or another, but it's important that we recognize and say to people like, oh, I see in you the possibility for this. I see in you the possibility for that. And so not everybody is going to make it through every tier to get to being a church planter, but in the course of having this mindset of like developing leaders, we're going to have stronger leaders in our churches who are discipling than newer people who are coming in. And you'll have this constant cycle of discipleship going on instead of it all just resting on the pastor and maybe like a handful of key volunteers who have been there for a long time. And so how do we move people through the pipeline? Because what I believe is that I don't know if there's, again, love being vague. I don't know if there's exactly like, this is the time that you're ready, because the truth is, and everything that I've read around church planting and studied, the church will never feel ready. There will always be, well, we need just 20% more people, or our funds are just not there yet. But how many times has God delivered in like those absences? I mean, I think the most famous story we can think of in the Bible is Gideon. Right? Like this totally fearful man hiding out, like, leave me alone. And God's like, okay, you're the warrior. And then like, and I'm going to take away thousands of your people to fight with you. And you're just going to go into battle with a few hundred against thousands of people. And you're going to win, not because of you, because of me. And so the reality is that we're never going to feel ready personally or as a church of like, this is the moment. But if we do our due diligence to again, the Great Commission is not go and make converts, is go and make disciples. And so if we're doing our due diligence to go and make disciples in our church and outside of our church, then I think that the moment will reveal itself of like, wow, maybe the next step is this, whatever this is. But we have had to have kind of done our due diligence and work ahead of time.
Yeah, I like that because it's like it's similar to like, having a kid.
I
Like
was just
most
about
people,
to say that.
Yep.
I don't think I've ever met a parent who's just like, I feel so ready to have like have my first kid or like have another baby. There's always something inconvenient when
Yep.
or like
Well,
I
even
mean,
like if I had a friend, and I think I maybe even felt this way a little bit. It's like, I'm not sure if I have enough, like financially, I just need to get like XYZ before we have a kid. And then like, I mean, just unknowns happen, You have a kid and you had an extreme situation in the hospital that you have a bill that you would have never prepared for, or your child, once getting kind of morbid, like has a disease that you could have never prepared for and you have
Right.
expenses. And so like you can't prepare for these things that you don't know fully. You just kind of step out in faith and
Yeah.
go for it.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's probably some pretty obvious times when it's like, no, this really isn't a good time kind of thing.
yeah.
But I think that's got to be up to the discretion and the unity of the church body, especially the leaders, to make that decision. And when we are in unity, then we can, out of that can come multiplication. Where if there's a lot of disunity in the leadership, if there's disunity in the body, if there's disunity in the church, then disunity unfortunately often leads to division. And that is not going to be fruitful in the same way that multiplication is.
Mm. What do you like? Should there be specific thoughts to like, so I've heard Jim, I think he probably mentioned it on your podcast on episode 1. I know I've heard him mention this just in talking before with the idea of church planting, the adage of like, it takes all types of churches to reach all types of people. And so we need different styles and different leadership and different whatever. So like, what if a church is just planting and basically making a carbon copy of what they're already doing? Like, is that beneficial? I think probably the answer to that would be yes. Of course, they're planting a church, maybe reaching new people, but should there be strategic thought process and like, how is this church plant going to be different from what we're already doing? Or do you just let them go and do their own thing? And even if
No,
they
I think
do A, B, C the exact same way, it's fine.
Yeah, I think that there needs to be some strategy behind it. And so usually, if somebody is going to be like, oh, I really want to plant a church, it's not just, I just am itching to plant a church kind of thing. It's more of, I really want to plant a church in this area, in this neighborhood, and for this reason, because of reaching these people. And so that's where we kind of start getting into the conversation around demographics, and really being strategic with, okay, then how am I going to be strategic for the gospel, for the sake of the gospel, to plant a church, a faith community here in this area? And, at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, what's a quote unquote kind of successful church plant? And so a successful church plant might mean one person comes to know the Lord, or it might mean nobody comes to know the Lord directly from there, but all of those people who attend that church plant, no matter how long or short it is, become better disciples and are actively engaged in their churches that they end up going on to after that. So I think we have to remove an expectation in our minds of numbers and of data and of results. I think about the time when David like counted his army and God's like, okay, well, you get to choose your punishment. Which one would you like? Because sometimes we can get so caught up in our data that we forget that's like the work is not us. Jesus says, upon this rock, I will build my church. It's not about us building the church. And so there should be strategy. And actually, so Northwest Yearly Meeting, for those who are at annual sessions, already know this, but we released our church planting pathway. And this is not intended to be like a super strict, like checklist and you will be punished forever if you do not follow it. But what we do recognize is that there needs to be some guardrails kind of put in place that can help keep us on track of strategy so that we can come alongside the work the Holy Spirit is doing rather than stifling the work of the Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm one of those people that generally likes to having like concrete actionable steps. So it's like for me, I love a flow chart. I'm like, give me that flow chart. Next step. Let's cross that off that list. Oh,
Yes.
so good. Because it's like at one point you're like, well, what do I do now? What do I do now?
Right.
What's the next step? And it's good to know to be like, okay, here's the structure. Because if like you don't have a structure, like how do I plan a church? Like what's the? But I do want to kind of piggyback off of. I mean, Jacob made a statement earlier, and you kind of made a statement of like you made a there's all kinds of churches for all kinds of people.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of Jim's famous lines.
It is.
But this is what I was wondering is there all kinds of church planters for all different kinds of churches? Because it's like you made a comment about like, well, you need to be like a self-starter and these other things, but like what kinds of people should be church planters and what kind of people should not be church planters?
Yeah. Yeah. So actually, when you listen to episode 2 on church planting conversations, Brian and I dive into this because a part of what we talked about is kind of our origin story. So he's planted a church and I have not. So like, what am I even doing in this world and talking about it? But really, we kind of dove into it. It really, church planting is a team approach. And so it's not just about having a single church planter, one person. Now that person is gifted in specific areas and they may be driving a vision of what maybe God has given to them, but also it takes a team of people around that planter to help to execute that vision. So I think of Ephesians 4, it talks about how that we've been given apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers, so APEST. And that is for the work of ministry. So like, I kind of think that when we're inside the church, that's like the practice ground. And then when we actually go out into the world, that's where we kind of activate all of how God has gifted us and wired us. And so you're going to have people who are apostles and they're great starters and they're truth tellers. They're like, here's the message from God. They're prophetic. But then if that's all you have and you don't have somebody who's a shepherd, somebody who's really caring for people and loving on them and being present with them and being present in that sense, then you're really going to be lacking in your church plant. And then how far will you be able to go if you're not able to provide that care and love and concern for your congregate members? And so I believe that anybody could be a church planter, no matter what your giftings are, whether it's APEST or Enneagram or 6 types of working genius, whatever one you want to lean into, what kind of potato are you, whatever you want to lean into, it doesn't matter. So, but the important thing is that we have a team around us who is walking alongside to execute the vision as a team. And so collaboration is going to be, I think, is going to be increasingly important. And I'm seeing this even here, like, so in Sherwood, we have a network of churches that we get together with regularly and meet with regularly for prayer and other gatherings. We actually do once a year, we do a unified church service. This year we had 6 churches participating. It was outside at the middle school. And I think we're going to continue to see some of those barriers come down. But when you say so Jim's line takes all kinds of churches to reach all kinds of people. You've got very liturgical churches, people that just are really drawn into that. Like, this is the most extreme example that I kind of think of. And then you've got like the totally free flowing, like Pentecostal, like dancing in the aisles, lots of energy, right? Like you've got that. You've got really quiet churches that sing a lot of hymns. You have more kind of that non-denominational kind of vibe where, you know, the pastors wearing the worship pastors wearing skinny jeans and rip holes in their jeans, and they're, you know, playing their guitar while they're leading worship. And so there is all different kinds of churches to reach all kinds of people. But I don't think that you necessarily need to be a particular type of person to plant a church. What is important is that if you recognize you have a gaping hole somewhere, You need to find the people to help fill that, to
Yeah.
come alongside you as you are working on something together on mission. That's what that is.
Random aside, but an older guy at our church this Sunday told my wife that he would give her some money to buy some new jeans because she had holes in them. And I think he was serious. That's what I thought
No.
about when you said the worship pastor with ripped jeans.
Yeah, well, some people love ripped jeans.
I
Some
know.
people totally dig that. And then there's like you might have a church that meets on a, in an evening service, and like that's when their church meets.
Yeah.
Destiny Friends, I don't is merged with Crossroads Community, but that's a
Mhm.
tourist town, and so actually for a while their church services were on Monday nights because the people that were local that belonged to their church, they couldn't go to church on Sunday morning because they were working. That was
Yeah.
when they had to be at work. And
Yeah.
so they had church on Monday nights. And so again, really paying attention to the demographic and who is it that you are specifically trying to reach. Now, where you're at in Idaho and where you're at in South Salem, like that might, and where I'm at in Sherwood, we might have just like a couple of different demographics to pick from. But if you find yourself in a very urban area, you might be like, oh, the geographic around me is like small, but there's a lot of different cultures here. There's a lot of different types of people. Who is it that I really want to like target my church for? I think it's Zig Ziglar that says, if it's nice to be sounds very spiritual and churchy to say, well, we just want to minister to whoever God gives us. But I think it's Zig Ziglar that says, if you aim for nothing, you'll hit it every time. And so if you don't have in your mind kind of who you're wanting to contextualize the gospel for, not that we want to change the gospel, but we want to make sure that we're communicating the gospel in a way that people can receive.
Yeah.
So how you contextualize it, how you communicate it, how Paul communicated to the Jews versus the Gentiles was very different. And so if we don't contextualize appropriately, then we're not going to reach the target audience of who we're hoping to reach. And so that's why it's important to have that piece of strategy as you're going into it.
It's a good thought.
Yeah. Well, I don't have anything else. I don't know if you do, Austin, or if you have any last things, Lisa.
I don't have any more burning questions.
I know.
Yeah, I guess I just want to encourage all of your listeners, everyone that's on this listening right now. There was one thought that I kind of had as I was thinking about this today. One thing to lean into if you're like, I'm just not sure if our church is ready for that. But there's something stirring in you of like, but maybe one day we could be there, but you don't think you're ready yet. One thing I would really actually encourage you to do is reach out to Alan Wynot, because he oversees our church revitalization coaches and process. And he might be a really good person to like just have that conversation with you and to see like, we don't think we're healthy right now. We don't think we're ready for planning a church, but maybe we want to be. That might be another really good place to start as well. And so I think that revitalization and church planting actually, I think that they will go hand in hand, and they do go hand in hand, because if you're a healthy church, you'll feel more free to be able to then plant a church. But first we got to get healthy. And so if we're not healthy, that's going to leave us feeling like, oh, we just can't do one more thing.
Yeah.
But if you're operating as you're supposed to be operating and you're healthy in that respect, which revitalization can help with that, then that might be something to consider, because you never know how God's going to use that for then you to multiply church or many down the road. And remember, we were all a part, all of our churches were all a plant at some time.
That's true. Had to get started somewhere. Well, thanks for joining us, Lisa. And yeah, I know we mentioned it at the top here, but Friends Multiplication Conference, November 13th through 15th. If people have not signed up yet, it's not too late. If you're listening to this at the beginning of November, you can jump in for that at friendsmultiply.org.
Yep.
And be a part of that.
Yes, please. We would love to have you. And we are just doing our part to operate in the Great Commission as God has commanded us. So hope to see you there.
Yep. All right. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Well, I think that was good. Yeah, I enjoy, like, we've had Lisa on before. She's great. I love chatting with her and
Always a
Bob
pleasure.
when we see them at a yearly meeting. But yeah, I do think a lot of churches probably feel that they're not ready. Whether or not that's accurate, I don't know. Like she said, it kind of depends. You may need to have that conversation with some other people and see if your church is in a healthy spot. But I would be willing to guess that maybe more churches are in a position that they could plant, but for whatever reason, they're just not.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's like so many things that has to kind of align, I think.
Mhm.
But I definitely think that I think it's a good thing just to keep in mind, right? No matter where you're at, because I think the truth is that all of us can participate in church planting in one way, shape, or another, whether it is trying to like raise up the next generation with like leadership training, maybe it's through prayer. Cause like even just like even just being like, okay, like I want to desire this, and you like spend time praying for the lost will move you one step closer.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think it's always good to have these sorts of conversations and just kind of keep it regularly back to the front of your mind. I know that it's like, it can sometimes feel like, like church planting is like ministry can be a zero-sum game, right? That there's like, there's like regular church and then there's church planting, and they like the ministry of the two kind of compete, or, what about revitalization? And like sometimes it can feel like there's like all these needs and not enough people. But I think some of the stuff all they're all on one accord, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're a church that is struggling, just being passionate about the lost can move you a step in the right direction. Doesn't mean that you'll be church planting anytime soon, but like
maybe you would just start some new ministry at your church that's going to reach out to some new. So, good stuff.
Yeah, good stuff.
Well, we will chat with you all again I say chat with you as if people are engaged with us on this, but
we'll have another conversation.
We'll have another conversation in December that you can listen to. And if you wouldn't mind, go leave us a rate and a review on iTunes or Spotify, or these are on YouTube now. We do post the video versions on YouTube. You can just search up Northwest Yearly Meeting Podcast, and I'm sure you'll find them on there. They usually come out a few days after the podcast version, but yeah, if you like to watch podcasts, I guess some people do that.
That's like a thing. That's a thing.
I know. I don't.
I mean, because sometimes people just use YouTube as their podcasting platform.
I know. Which I guess if it's just running in the background, that's fine. I'm usually listening to podcasts either in the car or at the gym or while I'm mowing the lawn, 3 places that I cannot and should not actively be looking at my phone. So I'm like, why would I put it on YouTube? I can't look at it anyways. But
I mean, if you're at the gym,
I could.
If you're like on a treadmill,
I like to keep my phone in my pocket though, because I like the step counter to activate. Even though I know I get the steps either way, I just like to see the results of it, So if my phone is sitting on the caddy of the treadmill, it's not counting my steps.
Yeah, I generally am lifting weights in the gym, so it's like I couldn't watch something.
There you go. Yeah, see? So, but if you do like to watch it, you can see us on YouTube. Other than that, we will be back next month. Adios. Once again, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to share it with others. Please rate and review the podcast so others can find it.